Okay, I heard from the robot that recording is in progress, so it's a green sign. Welcome everyone again. First want to start with the team. The team consists of me, Yolaine, and Sarah. That I would say maybe if we had this call a month ago, but luckily we are even a bigger team right now, with Andy and Alexandra joining us as well. So while welcoming you, I would also like to welcome them again to the team. Right now we have more hands and more brains to deliver you more value. And we're really looking forward to collaborating together and make sure that we can organize awesome events for you and for people who are interested in UX. So can't see Andy and Alexandra, but just waving them from here.
I'm waving.
Nice. Let's talk a bit about us, who is UXify Eindhoven. We are passionate about user experience. That's why we are doing it. And we are actually not just designers, but also startuppers, developers. We have different experience and levels in this field. And our goal is to bring value to people who are interested in this discipline from Eindhoven, but then also from around the world, because well, COVID kind of prevented us from having the meetings in person, but it also allowed us to expand actually outside of the borders of Eindhoven and the Netherlands. And our community is growing in a pace that has never happened before. So we are kind of updating every month how many UXifiers we have. And I had to make this change for this slide as well. So we have more than 1,200 people. If you think there are people who would be interested in our community, please make sure that they can follow us on one of the social media channels that we have, so they can also keep updated about the stuff we do here. At the beginning of the year, what we did was we actually organized a call, kind of a workshop with the community members of UXify Eindhoven. And we just walked through different kind of like activities, exercises to understand what would be the needs of the community. And ethics was one of the topics that came from that session. And it was in our minds since then to organize something around it. And after we have seen also the RSVPs on Meetup, I think it was a good confirmation that this was quite interesting for the community. And we are really happy that we are kicking it off today with you all. This is going to be the first event that we are going to be having in this series, and we'll have 2 more. And for the other events in July and August, we are still looking for speakers. So if that rings a bell, if you have someone who would be interesting for us to kind of welcome in the next series, next events of the series, please reach out to one of us. We'll be happy to contact them and have them on UXify. But let's focus on today's speaker, who is Lennart, Senior Service and Experience Designer at Mirabeau. It's also quite special for me to have him as our speaker because we studied at TU Eindhoven together. So I'm really happy to have him with us tonight. And we didn't maybe talk like one-on-one about this topic so much in detail, but I've been following his LinkedIn posts about this topic, and it seems quite interesting and quite impressive, the research he's doing, the hours he's putting into this, and the impact he's trying to create. So I'm super curious about the content of the presentation today, and looking forward to the discussion all together, of course, because we want to keep things social. So without further ado, I will give the stage to Lennart, and he can share what he has for us right now.
Yes, thanks a lot, Berkay. All right, let me start by sharing. Let's choose the right screen as usual. Go. All right. I'm super happy to be here too, Berkay. It's always nice to catch up, and I'm really looking forward to share something with an Eindhoven community, which is sort of where well, not where I started design, but where I sort of formalized my journey into design. So I'm, even if it's just remotely, I'm super happy to be here. And I'm of course very much looking forward to discuss design ethics today. It's definitely a topic very close to my heart. I think the last 8 years I've been a designer, or maybe it's 9 by now, I don't know anymore. And I think the last 3 years I spent researching and on the topic, trying to practice it into, structurally into the projects. And it's definitely not an easy thing. And I'm really looking forward to share what I've learned, what I've tried. I have a framework that I'd like to share. And I'm really looking forward to hear your responses, to discuss about it afterwards. Yeah, so let's get going. By the way, there's a trick that I heard, that I learned yesterday. Feel free to turn off your camera during my talk, because that will save a little bit of energy. And so the environment will thank you for it. And then after I'm done, you can catch up visually again. So let's get going. Ethics. There's many definitions and out there, but I think this one might be my favorite. It comes from the Encyclopedia online. So design ethics concerns moral behavior and responsible choices in the practice of design. It guides how designers work with clients, colleagues, and the end users of products, how to conduct the design process, how to determine the features of products, and how to assess the ethical significance or moral worth of the products that result from the activity of designing. In other words, it's really all about the sort of the goodness of how we work and the impact of what we create. And that impact is quite, very real, unfortunately. It's definitely something we have to take into account. If you look at the typical company, it requires way too much data than strictly necessary. And data has become way more valuable than people, essentially. And the current digital landscape that we look at is addictive, constantly competing for our attention. Our products distract people from basically the most valuable resource that we have in this life, which is time. And overall, we're helping to create a culture of consumerism. Our products have often way too little friction, too much persuasion through, social pressure and fake urgency, as for example, these two examples. And therefore, it's our responsibility to consider how much data is really strictly necessary, to limit everything that disrupts our users' attention, and stick to persuasion techniques that do not abuse the unconsciousness of people. But even if we do an excellent job there, we also tend to forget that we create solutions mostly for people who are weird, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And even within that group, we tend to focus mostly on the ones who are average, right? They don't know disabilities, or maybe they represent the big companies that have more money. Typical business model. So in doing so, we reinforce the trend of success to the successful. The wealthy become more wealthier, the poor become more poor, and even further excluded from fair participation in society. That's the pattern that we support by the work that we do. So we need to find ways around that. We need to find ways to make our creations more inclusive, impact something of a force that supports social justice. And of course, our impact doesn't even stop there. I'm willing to bet that 99% of us work for industries that continue to pollute and warm up the earth. And there's even an even sadder trend there, because those that cause the problem, which is us, who are living in the global north, we feel the least of the impact. So there is definitely not so much urgency on our side. We don't feel it, at least. And as Sir David Attenborough reminded us, I think in the last 50 years, it was about 68% of known species that have gone extinct. So our economy is essentially just killing off biodiversity. And we are part of that economy. So digital, like everything else, is physical. So we should support sustainable business models, make our users aware of their footprint, and definitely limit the energy consumption of our software. So ethical design is to assess the impact of all of these areas on our designs: small, large, direct, indirect, short, long-term, as best as possible, right? And then we have to take moral decisions on how to do the least harm. And this, I completely agree with what Johannes was mentioning before. It's important to realize there's no wrong or right moral decisions. It's a discussion, not a set of rules. So for any possible topic that we can come up with, we can discuss our virtues, our moral laws, or the consequences, but it's not an option to not engage in these discussions, because that means not taking responsibility, right? So luckily, many of us have the interest, and many of us have been discussing design ethics, right? We've written many articles, created toolkits, dedicated entire conferences to the topic. But if you really, really ask yourself, what have you actually done about it? Can you really say with certainty that everything that you've created results in the well-being of others, reduces social injustice, and fights climate change? Can you really say that? I think if you're like me and like 99% of all designers, then your answer to that question will likely be no, you cannot. And there are very understandable reasons why this is the case. It is very easy to have moral principles, yet in the real world, it's very seldom easy to act according to those principles. We might simply feel there's a lack of time, a lack of budget, there's maybe more urgent priorities right now. We think, no, our clients and managers, no, they will never pay for it. Or simply it's too much, we might not even know where to start. So these kind of things, they need to end, right? We as designers should be able to exercise a responsibility and get a grip on our impact of society and the planet. And this is why, what brings me to the topic of today, I think we need to elevate design ethics to a way more practical level. And that's what I mean by daily ethical design. Ethics structurally integrated into our daily practice as designers. This is the only way to make ethics more than just an inconvenience to business. But clearly we're still missing something, because we are definitely not there. So unfortunately, we are trapped in this system, right, that reinforces consumerism, inequality, and this fantasy of endless growth. So we have to consider, how are we part of this wider system? We have to step out of our design silos and figure out what can we do to influence that system in such a way that it supports ethical design. Step out of our design bubble, essentially. And this starts by acting on the right level of the system. Maybe some of you know Donella Meadows, who is quite a famous system thinker. And she once listed a list of ways to influence a system. And it starts by, on the lowest level of effectiveness, you're looking at numbers. You can change them, right? You can change revenue, the number of design critiques in your team. But these kind of things, they won't change the behavior of a company. And also changing buffers, stocks, flows, they will not change anything. On the next level, you have delays. These are quite interesting because they are really at the core of the challenge of design ethics. Because there's typically a delay between us creating a design and us receiving the feedback about the impact of that design. While delays are extremely important for designers to understand, changing delays is not really doing a lot to influence the overall company. So let's move on. Let's move to the next level still. The other way. Feedback loops are interesting. So you can change feedback loops like management control, for example, or employee recognition. And these will make quite a bit of great impact on how well a company operates. But it still doesn't affect the purpose of the company. So we're still not yet at the right level of influence. This way. The next level is information flows. And funnily enough, this is the level where most ethical initiatives are at now. Ethical methods, toolkits, articles, conferences. This is also the place where most of ethical design remains mostly theory. Not only, because there's still more powerful influencers, we're only at level 4 here, but also because our information flows compete with all the other information flows out there. From sales, from finance, from consulting, they all have their own flows of information that are competing with ours for attention, for legitimacy. So our design knowledge and tools are not enough to bring change. So essentially, we have been sort of focusing on the wrong level of the system all this time. So if you take rules, for example, the 3rd level, they really eat knowledge for breakfast. They can be in official rules, such as, for example, how finance works, or the definition of done in a Scrum team, just as an example. But rules can, of course, also be unspoken, such as comments like, my favorite is, the client didn't ask for it. End of discussion. You can focus on changing rules, but that's typically very hard if you don't hold official power, right? In the traditional sense. So that's why this level is so powerful, self-organization. So experimentation, diversity, bottom-up initiatives, passion projects, self-steering teams, all of these are very good at improving the resilience and the creativity of a company. But really, there can only be one winner. So even stronger than the self-organization are goals and metrics. If a company's goal is to make more money, then everything and everyone in the company will do their best to make the company more money. And also, if you realize that profit is nothing else but a metric, really nothing else, you also start understanding how powerful metrics are for pushing a company in a certain direction. So this is the level that you want to focus on. So if goals are how we as designers can influence the system, what does that mean for ethical design? So it starts by redefining what success means. So traditionally, we consider a product or service successful when it's desirable, viable, and feasible. However, focusing on these 3 only will not prevent us from creating products that are irresponsible, that manipulate people or do all the bad stuff. So we need to also define the dimension of responsibility so that it really positively impacts individual society and the planet. And this is where the goal setting also comes in. So basically, we have to set goals at least for 3 levels of objectives. On the objective of the individual, the human being, we should go to success that goes beyond the typical focus of usability and satisfaction. Instead, we should be taking into account things like time and attention, as I mentioned earlier. So personally, I am pursuing the objective of well-being, of human well-being. And on the level of the society, we have to consider impact beyond just the user. It goes to the economy, to communities, to indirect stakeholders. So personally, my definition is that we strive for equity, but there can be different definitions of this, of course. And then there's a level on planet, there's a planet level to make sure that we basically live in harmony and in balance with, this only home that we have. And I simply refer to it as sustainability, typically. And to make sure that we reach these objectives, we have to start at the start of every project, put specific metrics. Because as I said before, what gets measured gets done. If our metric is to track screen time, we will end up with a solution that uses less screen time. If our metric is to determine the energy consumption of our software, we will end up with software that requires less energy. So because metrics, they basically give us direction on how we can influence our projects. And they also tell us if we've reached our responsible objectives. Something that design principles, unfortunately, don't do. And once we have that, once we have these goals, once we have these metrics, then, and I would say only then, we can do daily ethical design. Because then we can use all our creativity and all the toolkits out there to, deliver that responsible impact. But still, having redefined success, it still does not guarantee that these objectives become part of every project, right? I mean, you can set them for yourself, you can even set them with your design team, but yeah, it might still strand there. It's still this theory, and we need to get to a daily ethical design practice, right? And also remember that basically everything and everyone in your company will actively fight you on this, because they want you to continue to support the current limited purpose of the system, of the organization, of the company. Suddenly you will have the cynical people appear from every corner and passionately remind you basically that what you want to achieve is impossible. And in the end, companies are only interested in making profit. And for some strange reason, which I don't understand, they will consider that to be a valid argument to do absolutely nothing about that. So rather than a revolution, we need to have, an organized evolution. And luckily there are ways to do that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel this time. For example, there's this tried and tested management method that I like, 4 disciplines of execution, it's called. And basically it's developed especially for succeeding when you have an initiative that tries to go against they call it the whirlwind. So all the urgent stuff that we need to do to keep going, right? The deadlines and oh shit, I have to do this, finish this and project there, deadline, because the core of this method is to create the focus. Doing less in order to achieve more, or I would even say achieve actually something. So if you apply this to ethical design, you can start putting a framework together. So you start by focusing on a single goal that captures your new definition of success. For example, what I follow is achieve well-being, equity, and sustainability in every project. Essentially, what you're doing is that you set a new, improved purpose statement for your company. And it also means that everyone who wants to, involved in this can set their own personal goal for themselves, that in some way they can support that overall purpose, where it's again, focus is the key. Just choose one thing you can influence, one thing that you're working on where you can have a little bit of impact. So I don't know, if you have a passion for workshop facilitation and sustainability, then focus on creating a workshop in which you assess the impact of your design on the environment and apply that. Just one thing. Because if you just imagine for a moment, like if everyone in the company would do that, just spending 5%, 10% of your time, you would end up with a completely different company at the end of the year. But of course, you can see visually, there's still a disconnect here. Like, how do you get all these people to go? How do you organize this essentially? This 4 disciplines of execution, 40X, it's called also, does have some answers for that. So it starts by determining what kind of streams will lead to the overall destination, right? So what kind of tracks or streams lead to this purpose statement there at the top? I think it will be, it's different per industry and per type of company, But if you're looking at a design agency, it should have at least 4 that cover the main aspects of business. So one is to sell responsible projects, to enable people to sell responsible projects. So this involves salespeople with new business. You want to provide them new business cases, new responsible offerings, etc. And then we also have to find ways to enable people to deliver on these responsible projects. So this involves, trying out new tools, making them available to people, maybe mentorship programs, etc. So, and that goes beyond designers. This goes for everyone. Basically, you want to make them available to everyone who works on the front lines. Then, what I mentioned before, you need to track to measure the impact on responsibility. So this is finance and ESG. So basically, the social and the environmental impact of our work. And of course, you're going to need some marketing. You need to engage people, you need to inspire them, you need to activate them. You need to create success stories, share with each other, so that you keep the engagement going. And you can also grow the community further. And then you want to add one person, sort of a coordinator, to each stream. And they will push that stream forward within the company. They all set their own SMART goal. For example, the delivery coordinator could set as a goal to have a draft knowledge repository by the end of December 2021. And they also set their own metrics. So basically, these are the activities that they have direct control over. So perhaps the percentage of people that have access to the knowledge repository could be one for the delivery coordinator. So what do these sales coordinators do exactly? Well, it's in the name, they coordinate. So all these passion goals of different people, they can be connected to a specific stream. And then it's the job of the coordinator to connect and integrate these goals. And that is how you create focus within your company. And with that focus, you are now free to actually practice the daily ethical design. So the process is relatively simple. People follow their passions in work. They are supported by these coordinators who have weekly update meetings, like a stand-up, to keep this fixed cadence of discipline. And this way, the initiative will start growing, right? Initial results are integrated by the coordinators. They are used to enable others to do their work. They're used to measure. This leads to even more results. And more people start getting interested, and they start seeing that, hey, it actually is possible. I want to be in too. So the awareness will grow, management will start to see that it has actually business sense, or I would even say world sense. And so slowly the company starts reinventing itself. And all of that is possible because of these sort of relentless focus on the most effective influences, which you see in the left: purpose, self-organization, diversity, and experimentation. And finally, you can have managers on all kinds of levels. They can support this initiative by acting as sponsors. So they will have the traditional power to actually implement into projects, into sales offerings and incentives, team incentives, or professional development of people. So a question I sometimes get is, who goes first? Who actually starts this initiative? In my view, it could be anyone, but it will depend, of course, on your company and especially on the maturity of your company. And to a certain extent also on the long-term vision of your leadership. I mean, it could be started by a CEO, in which case it would be rolled out through the whole company and you would start pursuing responsibility. This is quite unlikely though, because executives are even more stuck in the system than we are, because they have shareholder obligation, growth expectations. It's a lot harder to navigate them. There's a lot less freedom than we have. It could, for example, also be sort of a visionary middle manager, right, who implements it for the team. More likely already, but it takes also quite some courage to do that in that position. Or, and this is what we did in my company, we started just ourselves bottom up. So in our company, the coordinators are basically a diverse group of people who do not have any, significant or traditional sense of power, but together we are making small steps to start making a difference. As Dante Alighieri, the famous Italian writer, wrote, "A mighty flame follows a tiny spark." So finally, as it turns out, we've been doing this for a while, and actually it's super exciting. When you start doing this, it opens up an enormous new set of challenges and considerations for the design process that you would normally not have. Should you put that energy consuming video, or should we just put a simple illustration? Which font that we use is the most calm, most inclusive? What kind of new tools and methods can we use to actually fulfill on these objectives that we set? What is actually the end of life of my website? And how do we even make sure that those who are impacted by a design decision, are also there when a decision is taken? And how do we even measure that impact? So this simple redefinition of success will completely change what it means to do good design. We can almost start over again learning design, and this is extremely fun and exciting to do, if you ask me, and very rewarding. So let's have a quick look at what it could mean to practice daily ethical design in a typical project. So let's meet the design team, right? They will soon start working on a completely new boarding experience for, let's say, an airline client. And the design team has its support roles. So there's the client partner, there's the project manager, there's the creative lead. They will make sure that the team can maintain 100% focus on the design challenge. And, given that as designers, we do not know everything, they can definitely also call upon subject matter experts, such as sustainability or simply the industry. And then it's time for the team to embark on the project journey, let's say. So they will go to the kickoff phase, the problem space, solution space, and the iterative cycles of development. And here's a note. I think the kickoff is the most important phase you've probably forgotten to include in your project, because this is where the entire design team meets the project and all the relevant stakeholders. So everyone gets to know each other and is able to express their expectations. You discuss the assumptions that maybe were raised during the sales during the project. But most importantly, and this is really where responsible design starts, you can determine what success means for a project, in terms of desirability, viability, feasibility, and responsibility with the client, with the stakeholders, with the users in this kickoff session. This is where you can agree on the success criteria for each dimension. Because if you do that, you have the buy-in to actually start applying it in your project. If you do not do that, you're fighting an uphill battle that you're most likely to lose. But this is the most crucial part of any project. So in this case, the team decides on, for example, customer satisfaction, employee recognition, financial cost reduction, scalability, carbon emission reduction, and community involvement as the success criteria for this project. So now the team is basically ready to pursue the right objective. So now they turn their attention to understanding the challenge. So the human research of the team, they might be studying people across the customer journey, the employee journey, using, of course, an inclusive sample of people and explaining findings with academic research. Then there's perhaps a service designer that collaborates with the client, the sustainability expert, to map all the stakeholders, both direct and indirect, human, non-human, everything who could be impacted. And then together with an airline industry expert, maybe the business designer dives into the business model of the airline, aiming to understand the role of the airline in for reinforcing economic inequality, or its effect on small businesses or the communities surrounding it. And then you have the creative lead, the project manager, who are sort of defining the leading metrics on the background, so that they can also start measuring the current state of the boarding experience. And everything of this is captured in a stakeholder map, profiles of real people, no personas, and an extended service blueprint that includes sort of a natural ecosystem layer below the business layer. And then finally, at the end of this phase, with all the stakeholders in the room, they agree together, okay, this is the problem that we're solving, this is the scope, and this is our sort of single sentence creative brief. And that allows the team to now solve the right problem. During the solution phase, I mean, the designers, with support from the human researcher and the subject matter experts, they start ideating on the business model, for example, with this flourishing business canvas. And they start sketching out service concepts that consider all the success criteria that were set in the beginning. And maybe meanwhile, there's a visual designer, copywriter, front-end developer that sort of explore a new brand and a communication style, perhaps based on guidelines for calm technology, low energy consumption, accessibility, etc. And in the middle of this solution space, this is also quite crucial. The team conducts what I refer to as a dark reality session, in which they try to uncover the assumptions and the potential negative aspects of the concept. They ask questions such as, what if millions of people use it? Who benefits? Who loses? Who is excluded? And as a result of that session, they take steps to improve it and change, for example, the business model, the concept. And maybe meanwhile, there's the visual designer, copywriter, front-end developer that take their white label design system from the shelf that they already have, start applying it in different contexts. And because it's a white label, it already has accessibility, progressive enhancement, and a carbon counter already included by default. But of course, this is real life. Not everything goes as planned. So the project reaches this crucial moment, right? The client expectations have been building up, and now finally we can show a concept, and they have issues. They are worried that, shit, yes, this will actually, okay, the team took steps, for example, to limit the harm to vulnerable communities, but hey, this will impact the financial profits. Escalation. And I think this is where, for example, the client partner and creative lead would, so sort of like the most senior people would intervene, where they remind the client, okay, these are the objectives that we, and the success criteria that we agreed on. And maybe they have like this sales repository where they pick some business cases and examples to show like, look, this has business sense. They all have that at hand already. And so ultimately they do manage to remind the client, because this is a happy story. Trust is restored, design team can carry on. So then there's the concept, they iterate on it with all they tested on all the impacted parties. And of course, it's evaluated based on those metrics that were set earlier. So now the team is ready to build the right solution. So they continue to design according, to the guidelines for calm technology, accessibility, low energy consumption. They continue to assess concept with potential impact, continue to test design, continue to measure the impact, and they use a definition of done that has all those dimensions included. So that's, in my view, what it means to do daily ethical design. So ethics structurally integrated into the design process. It will allow us to take the first step in this sort of evolution towards better design, but not only design, towards better business and a better economy. Reaching the end, but I wanted to share this framework with all of you in sort of, the typical design fashion. It's a work in progress prototype. And I want to share it with you so that we can test it together, improve it, learn from each other. There's many ways you can be involved in this. You can coordinate a stream, you can become a sponsor, you can maybe just simply pursue some sort of passion goal here. But I would really invite everyone to try it, to customize it, to adapt it to your company, to your team, to your situation. And together we can make it better, and we can actually make a change that turns this ship around. So we've been doing that, as I mentioned, for the last couple of months. We already have some promising results. I mean, we've made mistakes for sure. We're learning on the go. But what I really like is that we're actually doing ethics instead of just talking about it. And I think that is something I really want to continue doing. So if you're a manager, director, or executive, if you want to make a difference, I'll be really happy to help out on this topic. If you're a designer without such luxury of having these people on board, but you would like to start daily ethical design yourself, I'll also be happy to share my experiences. So feel free to get in touch. Here's the details. Here's also a list of books that I would recommend to read that provide the right knowledge and the right mindset to get started. I will share these slides after, so no worries. So I think my key takeaway of today is that as long as we just keep talking about design, ethical design, as long as it remains, at the level of articles and toolkits, and as long as we just keep talking between designers. I mean, we're doing it now too. I'm very happy there's some non-designers here too. But as long as we don't structurally assess the impact of our work, we are not designing ethically. But I also hope that I've made it clear that it doesn't have to be so difficult. We just need to set the right objectives, the right metrics, and basically the realization that we already have everything we need to get started. So we need a bit of courage, a little bit of determination, a bit of focus, and then we can break out of this, what I refer to as a cage of learned helplessness that finance has built all around us, and where we seem to be not willing to get out of anymore. One thing I can definitely promise you, I think daily ethical design will be the most innovative and creative challenge that you've ever taken on. A lot more than AI or VR or any of that. These are just technologies. And it will be extremely rewarding and also just simply a lot of fun. I want to leave you with a final thought. So I mentioned goals, right? They are very effective to influence the system. But there's actually one level above that, which are called paradigms. So these are the beliefs that we consider to be truths about a society. If you manage to change a paradigm of a sufficient amount of people, it will influence everything in the system, in order to align that truth, to align the system to that truth. So there are a couple of paradigms that I have identified that stand in the way of ethical design, and I want you to share them with you, and so that you can bring them and talk about them and change them. So the first one is that software is a virtual product. And designers don't have the influence to make a positive impact. That corporate social responsibility is just a side activity. That finance is the only measure of business value. That the purpose of a project, of a company, is to make profit. And most importantly, perhaps, that there can be no prosperity without economic growth. All of these paradigms will really need to change if you want to design a better world. So an important part of daily ethical design, of ethical design in general, is to start thinking how these paradigms limit your work. To have discussions with people, to set the goals that go beyond this sort of limited creativity paradigms, and to ask questions to make people realize, shit, yes, these are limiting us. And that brings me to the end, because this is how history unfolds. People weave a web of meaning, believe in it with all their heart, but sooner or later the web unravels. And when we look back, we cannot understand how anybody could have taken it seriously. And I strongly believe this is how it's going to be with those paradigms I just mentioned. And the beautiful thing is that as designers, we can do the unraveling, but we also can do the stitching it back together into something more beautiful. Thank you.
Grazie, Lennart.